This is the Page Publishing Book Club. How you doing? I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. Are kids better off today than they were in 1954, before the unanimous U.S. Supreme Court decision that racial segregation in public schools violated the 14th Amendment? CPA Charles L. Moore, who has written op-ed pieces for publications from the New York Times to the Michigan Chronicle, says absolutely not, and explains why in his book, The Aftermath of Brown v. Board of Education.
Kids are actually worse off now than they were when Brown was actually enacted. A lot worse. And it's a comparison contrast between all the players from 54 to today. The system is set up for these kids to fail and people to make money on, because what feeds the capitalistic system is cheap labor. And once you have an uneducated class, they a lifetime of cheap labor, right? So if the money is in failure, then you have to put the money into success. So Title I, the federal government, they basically track poor kids from kindergarten and all the way through high school. And if you can't read in the third grade, your probability of going to prison or being poor is how they actually estimate how much low-income housing, how many prisons, how many. That's why the third grade is so critical, right? And so I put together a grid. Instead of having all this money in Title I, which is pretty much a failure, we can put it in Title 14. This is a new title, right? I mean, new set of title that is on performance. So it's a bonus pool that will pay people in the building. And all of the kids are already set up on the platform because it's already set up for Title I. So the more poverty that you have in the school, the more Title I you get. If you have a school that's 90% at risk in Title I, then you can get a maximum bonus for your building. And then let's say, for instance, you got 8 other buildings and they all have the Title I and they all have the Title 14, but they don't meet the goal. That money goes into a pool that's for the schools that actually meet the goal, right? And so the maximum a principal could get is like $60,000 in a bonus. A teacher, 30. And so now you don't even have to police them because the money is tied to success. Once you pay out a principal a $60,000 bonus for performance, you're going to get better performances at the school because now their money depends on it. And at the poverty schools, they get the same amount whether the kids fail or do well, right? And it doesn't affect them because their kids don't go to the schools. So in 1954, all their kids went to the schools, so it directly affected them. But now it doesn't even affect these teachers and principals because 90% of them don't even live in the districts. That's why Chicago, and they know remote education is terrible for kids, but they came up with every excuse not to open up the schools. But the teachers that were there, their kids live in the suburbs and were in school. They don't really care. They get the same check no matter what. So what I'm saying is, if you want better performance, America is set up on risk and reward. So you need better teachers, but you have to pay them more because the challenges are more. And what happens at the school districts, the administration really doesn't understand what's going on in the buildings. They're into politics and all of the saying and doing the right things. Now the teachers and the principals really don't give a pushback. They just do what they say because it's just easier and they don't want to catch the smoke. But if you put that kind of money up, they're going to be pushing back because the teachers that's there know what to do. They can teach these kids. We can put people on the moon. We can make cars that can't drive. They can drive with, but you telling me we can't teach a third grader how to read?
I know.
I don't believe that. I'm too close to it. They can do it. It's just not enough money in it.
A lot of common sense there, Charles. Thank you. Between 1967 and 1970, 3.5 million people in Biafra were killed in a genocide war after seceding from Nigeria. They continue to fight for freedom and independence with little help or recognition from the rest of the world. Chimanzia hopes to shed light on their suffering in his book, A People Set Apart.
Governments around the world know because they understand that it is a place where elephants continuously fight and the grasses suffer. So these are the things that inspired me to start writing this book.
So the character, Chance, he's from a well-to-do family and somehow makes it to the United States from Biafra.
Chance came here out of the unknown. The mother, they lost two kids during the war, and the mom did not want anything to happen to any of her kids, assuming there's another war. So she convinces the husband to send Chance abroad to study and also to escape from what may come. The book is about, to highlight the grievous injustice or injustices done to the Biafran people. And these injustices, they have not been swept under the carpet yet because they are not resolved. They are still staring us constantly in the face. And the world tried to ignore it, but it's not going nowhere. So while Chance is one of the main characters in the book, the underlying factor the book is trying to establish, which could be the main idea, is about the genocide that happened in what they call the Biafran War. And this genocide, as it were, has not been resolved. And it has to be highlighted and underlined that apart from the Jewish Holocaust, there is no other orchestrated man's movement to man like the Biafran genocide that is not addressed. It is disheartening to juxtapose the atrocities committed against the Biafran people with the Armenian genocide or the Rwandan genocide or the Bosnian massacre. See, these other atrocities must never be forgotten, however they pale. Why these other atrocities or genocides have been addressed one way or the other, the Biafran genocide remains a sore on the conscience of the world and must be addressed. So we are trying to address that in the book. Though a fiction, it have resemblance in reality. But the point also is this: most disheartening is that some of the linchpins who committed or ordered the genocide against the Biafran people are still alive, walking in and out of government offices, shaking hands with world leaders who should be bringing them to account. So these are the things, while Chance was here to escape, the aftermath of the war, the issues surrounding the war, they are still there looking at us, and nobody seems to care, to address it. So what I'm trying to do in this book is to, let the world know, or let the reader understand that Nigeria, as is presently constituted, is a crime scene and a criminal enterprise. It is mind-boggling to note that Nigeria, as we speak, is home to 3 to 4 verified and classified as world's most dangerous terrorist groups. America is aware of this fact, from Boko Haram to Fulani herdsmen to ISWAP in West Africa. As we speak, the president of Nigeria is a darling of Boko Haram terrorist group. He's a patron of Fulani Herders group. if my country, America, could classify Iran, Afghanistan, and Syria as terrorist hotbeds, why is Nigeria not given this classification and sanctioned accordingly? So these are some of the things we try to address in the book to try to, raise the consciousness of the world to see what is happening and do the right thing.
You can only hope, Chimanzia. Thank you. Dale White ran an alpaca farm, which inspired his wife to write Ask the Alpaca. It was self-published before she died in 2012, and now Dale has republished the book with Paige.
It is about alpacas, of course, and how animals treat each other. It's a children's book. Explains how people should be treating each other in the context of animals. Unique is actually an alpaca that we bought. We brought her to the farm, and then she started meeting different animals on the farm. And she talked about how she met the horse, how she met the cow, how she met the sheep, how she met the goats, and how she interacted with all the animals on the farm and how she treated them. And that was basically the whole book, is how people should be treating society better as the animal outlook.
Is there any animal that she meets that it takes a little effort to get to know?
Her own kind, other alpacas, she had struggled interacting with her own kind of alpaca, the same breed, because they were basically the same mindset. The other characters, horses and stuff, had different characters that she could interact with. She couldn't interact with her own kind. And that was the overview of the human race. They have trouble interacting with their own kind, but they can interact with animals and different stuff of different kinds.
Why is that, do you think?
I don't understand why that is as a human race. I mean, I could get into the philosophy of, how it's brought up, but it's really a struggle for people to interact with their own kind. It really is. And it's real sad that we can't figure that out.
So the moral of the story is,
Be kind to everybody.
that's really nice. Now, because it was written so long ago, have you been able to read it to kids, or have kids been able to get a hold of this book?
When she first published it, we sold probably close to 5 to 10,000 books in that area of Washington and Oregon. But we really haven't touched anybody beyond that area. There's some books, because she signed every book, close to 10,000 books, personally signed them. And those original books are still out there. I've got quite a few of the originals. And then I reprinted it once when I moved back to Wyoming. So I've got a reprint, and then this publishing that I went through, I did a different spin on the memorials of the animals that passed away, her passing away, and all the memorials are in the book too.
When you say memorials, describe what a memorial is?
Well, a memorial is basically, she passed away and this is what she did in life. And that's basically the beginning of the book that talked about the animals on the farm that, that passed away throughout the years, that were interacting with everybody else. And then in the back of the book, the very back, it told about the whole farm and how it was a self-sustaining farm. And we had a worm farm, and we had all different kinds of self-sustaining, because it was a self-sufficient farm. We didn't have to work outside the farm. It interned itself. And then we were selling fertilizer. We had a great big worm farm. We were selling fertilizer, and we were doing clothing store. We did a huge clothing store too. So it was all self-sustaining in the farm.
Beautiful tribute to your wife, Dale. Thank you. Wick P. Crow had a dream in high school that became a sci-fi adventure she continued to work on through college. And now Clipped Wings, Book 1, The Calliope, is ready to read.
The whole trilogy is about this one kid who gets a curse put on him, and he grows crow wings. And the whole trilogy is basically about him dealing with that, and him also figuring out what it basically means to be loved and to love others, and what family is and what family should do for you. And it's a lot of different connections of different people coming together, and how one small thing you do for someone can come down into a bigger way down the road. He's a boy who grows wings. He learns how to fly within the first part of the first book. But the main conflict is that this child is a prince, and when he gets cursed, he ends up losing his memory and he gets sold into slavery somewhere, and he ends up in a circus, and he doesn't really understand that there's giant conflict that comes from that, but a prince going missing leads to a lot of conflict that starts building up over the course of the trilogy, because it's basically you're in trouble and you don't have any idea how much trouble you're actually in right now. He ends up in a circus and he doesn't remember who he used to be, so he's kind of just living this life as a child in a circus. Meanwhile, everyone else in the world is kind of trying to find him because the prince is missing from an enemy kingdom, and they're at war now because the prince is missing, and the kingdom's like, hey, we think you took our prince. And they're like, we don't know if we did or not, but let's go to war anyway because we don't like you.
And he has no idea that he's the one they're looking for.
Nope.
So do we have a cliffhanger at the end of the first book?
Yep. I'm a little bit nicer in the second one, but the second one definitely, story's not over yet, you can tell. There's a lot of characters. It's mostly focused on him because he's the narrator. So it's basically you're following his life and all the people he meets, and you're kind of following a bits of the lives of everyone around him. So there's definitely a lot of other characters in the story whose lives are very important, just as if in any child, the people in their life become very important to that child. There's a lot of layers. It's a lot of, like, you get set up something early in the first book that pays off towards the end of like the second or the third, and it's a lot of just little payoffs. Because again, it's a lot of the story is there's all these characters, and you'll meet somebody one day and then you'll just never see them again, but then you'll maybe meet them again down the road one day and they remembered what you did, and that comes together. It's just that little, how in life you meet someone you've now met them forever.
Yeah. It's kind of like life.
Yeah. It's just one thing to keep in mind about the trilogy is it doesn't have quite a perfectly intended audience because it's written from the point of view of a 9-year-old, so pretty much anyone preteen and up can comprehend it, but it does cover some pretty heavy topics too. He ends up in slavery, and there's this whole big part of this about the slave industry and all of that going on, and there's all this racism going on because he's from one country and he ends up in another country, and the two countries hate each other. So there's a lot of just like, serious topics that are going on and social commentary and things. It's kind of young adultish. It's what my idea is because it gets pretty dark and heavy. Yeah, it's fantasy. It's a fantasy book and with war and stuff, so stuff's gonna happen.
Just like real life, right? Thank you. An Air Force weapons specialist in Abilene, Texas, J.D. Smith was inspired by the movie Terminator Genesis to write timecon. Sort of, right? Explain.
I got into a crazy rant one day with a buddy of mine, and I told him how the timelines didn't match up and it didn't make any sense. So I wrote this whole whiteboard story out. I wrote a book based on that idea, and then I actually wrote timecom because I was waiting for the editing to be done on my first book, and I wrote a small page story, which is like chapter 1 of the book, and I gave it to a few friends of mine, and they said, dude, this is really cool. I've never seen anything like this. So I kept writing and writing, and turned it into the book Timecom now. And that was all based off an actual story or a conversation that a friend of mine had about what a dream is and deja vu, and which is how the story kind of follows after that. And we can always blame my mother too. She was my first and third grade English teacher. So
Oh, I would definitely blame her.
So Timecom follows the story and the character of Jonah. And Timecom is the concept that you have a dream, and you later might have a deja vu experience where you sit there and it's like, dude, I've done this before, or I've seen this already. And that's the deja vu moment. Well, the idea is for the use of Timecom, which is the concept, is that you can have these dreams and write them down and you see them generally about 6 months to a year in the future, because that's kind of how deja vu actually works with anybody. And you are having these dreams, but you are seeing what your future self sees 6 months to a year from now, because your future self is awake and your future self's brain is transmitting those depictions to your dreams in which you're receiving them. So if you can figure out how to utilize those dreams to talk to your future self, you can then, in essence, know the future of what's going to happen to you. But what happens is Jonah finds out the consequences of actually utilizing timecon and what it has an effect on his future, because he doesn't really know some of the issues that happen. Things get worse as a consequences of his actions of figuring out how to use deja vu to his advantage. There's a continuation bit at the end of each chapter, and the line, he has this dream of a young lady that's trying to talk to him through his dreams, and at the end of each chapter is, "Daddy, can you hear me?" And it's prominent throughout the entire book, and there's a reason why it's prominent. And part of that is due in part of Jonah trying to solve some problems that come up as he meets certain people who he has inadvertently had an effect on through his dealings with deja vu and utilizing it.
All right, JD, good stuff. Thank you. Ever had the feeling you weren't alone? That you were being visited from beyond? Sissy Johnson lives it every day and now tells the story, Once He Was Lost, Now I'm Found, based on the true story of John E. Wilkerson, 1773 to 1803.
So I bought a mobile home on the property I've been living on for 22 years. And when we first moved in, the kids were young. I started noticing things differently. I felt somebody standing behind me one morning. I was getting ready for work and getting the kids ready for school, and I was in the bathroom, put makeup on, and I turned around and looked. I said, huh? So later on, I started having visions of this man. And then fast forward some, I had a lot of visions of him. And then about 11 years after living there, then like he came into my dream and he showed me things that he was married and that he was from the 1800s. So my brother has this ability that he can communicate with spirits. So I went to him one day and told him about this dream I had. So he got his little pocket recorder. He came to my place. He said, "Who's this military man?" And that's when it was pretty much on from there. Like I had asked him to come into my dreams. Let's communicate. Let's find out what's going on here. His name is John Wilkerson. His wife is Stella Rose. They once, back, yes, again from the 1800s. Later, after they bought their property and built a house, she was 8 months pregnant. She was raped and murdered by the two guys that he had hired to work on his property.
So this was a real guy.
This was a real guy, yes, from 1800s. Yeah, so he was born like 1771, and his wife was born like 75 or something like. I mean, a little off on the dates, but yes, they were born in the 1700s. No, 1776. I'm sorry, because she was like 26 when she died, and he was 30.
Why was he coming to you?
Because he said to me in a dream, "You remind me of my first love." And I'm like, "Well, who's that?" And he told me her name was Stella Rose Whitfield. And so then I started having visions of her. And honest to God, like she could pass as my twin sister. And my daughter looks just like her. It's unreal.
Oh, I don't even know what to say.
Weird, huh?
What was his purpose, though? Just because you looked like her?
I moved on his property because they had owned it back then. When they got married, they got pregnant, they bought the property that I lived on. So he's still hanging out there. It's his. He's staying.
Does he still communicate with you?
I think sometimes he does, but I don't notice him as much because I'm used to it now.
So he was coming to you in his dreams. And then when you went to your brother was able to identify him?
Absolutely. He's got that ability. Like if you and I were looking at each other, he could tell, that he was standing there. He described him. He could see him. I can't. I see him out of my peripheral or I visualize him, but it's mainly about him, but it also explains the experience that I had with him.
That you will continue having for the rest of your life. Does he frighten you at all?
Not at all. Didn't even frighten me then. I saw him in a vision that he was standing in my bathroom. I thought, what the heck? So I ran in there. I kind of tore open the shower curtain. There was nobody there.
Do you worry about him being around like when you're, undressed?
I used to think that, and I really can't see him, but yeah, he's like, I come walking through at times and I see you naked. He's like, I show you respect. He goes, although you don't know that. He's like, but I do my thing. So I said, okay, so what about when I have a boyfriend over? He's like, sometimes I don't like it, but because some of the men could be buttheads, but he said, I just go on about my business. My brother wouldn't allow John to use his body to verbally talk to me. Although it looked like my brother will, and it sounded like him, but it was John talking, using his body.
And what did he say to you?
Whatever question I asked him, he would just explain it to me. Like, how long were you married? When did he buy his property? He told me the answer.
How do you do this in the book that he's just kind of there? He's like your friend now?
Basically, yes. I had ended it with, he will always be here. This is his property. This is where he will remain. How much life has changed from the 1800s to now. Look, if this kind of experience happened to me, then there's got to be others have experienced similar situations.
Absolutely, Sissy. No doubt. No doubt at all. We have had a number of people, I don't know how many, but a number of people on this show who are convinced they've had visitors from the other side. They've felt the presence of loved ones, and they believe spirits live among them and they communicate with them. You are not alone. No doubt your book is going to hit a nerve. Don't publish your address. I can just see like people showing up at your house and saying, hey, can I meet your guy? You don't want that. Anyway, that is it for this edition of the Page Publishing Book Club. If you want to find out more about the authors and their books, just go to pagepublishing.com. Check them out. You'll also find information on the process of writing, editing, and publishing your book, along with marketing and availability through a number of online bookstores, including Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Books A Million, just to name a few. If you missed anything on this show or any show, you can always download it at 710WOR.com. Thanks for being here, in person or online. We'll take it. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. I'll catch you next time.